Well, thank you, and thanks everyone for showing up. This has been an interesting adventure. We've had non-stop little technical glitches. David Wilcock, a good friend of ours, has this term. He calls it negative greeting, which is that metaphysically, the amount of weird stuff that happens is kind of directly proportional to the impact that whatever you're going to try to do is going to have. So given on the basis that I've been locked in a hotel room with Robin feeding me under the door for the last 3 days, having to redo the entire presentation because of compatibility problems, tonight should be pretty interesting. First of all, I want to welcome my Facebook friends here. How many are here from Facebook? Oh my, good, good. And a lot of others, obviously, new friends, and you will obviously after the evening go on Facebook and join this extended global conversation. I mean, it's astonishing that the technology that we now have that is so important to moving politically what is going on forward did not exist when we started. I mean, I've been at this, 30-some years? If you want to technically count my time at CBS with Cronkite or CNN, it's been 40-some years learning or unlearning what NASA was not, that I thought back then it was. So this has been a very long road, winding up in Leeds in northern England in 2011, which, as you may find out later in the evening, it's even later than you think because it might actually be 2012 already. We'll get into that. What I want to talk about tonight is the demise or close down or transition of the American space program, something which has been viewed in many quarters with doom and gloom and horror and loathing and fear and all the other things that are going on now in media, and which, of course, I may have a somewhat different perspective on. We'll see as the evening goes forward. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to move swiftly through part one, which will be roughly 90 minutes, give or take. Then we'll give ourselves a 10-minute break so you can stretch your legs and get something to drink or whatever, because it's kind of warm in here. I'm told that English don't believe in air conditioning, which is kind of like the Italians. Robin and I went to Italy for a weekend to speak some years ago, and because it was after October 1, oh, we can't have air conditioning. You what? Oh, no, we don't. We turn off the air conditioning basically on October 1st. So we had a very warm reception in Italy. Very. Just about as warm here. And this room, of course, everybody is 800 and some BTUs, so you multiply by the number of people. If we can turn up the fans or turn up the air, anything, because it will get warm by the end of the evening. Not the least of which is maybe perchance what I'm going to say. What I want to talk about is, among other things, this. The real story behind Elenin. And because I'm going to tease you madly, that's going to be at the end of the second half. Because you won't understand and appreciate all that's gone into this phenomenon unless you hear the first half and a good part of the beginning of the second half. Then we're also going to talk about this. This is NASA's absolutely astonishing visit to Vesta. Who would have thought that a little gal named Vesta, who is the goddess of the fire and the hearth and home, would have the potential to transform not just NASA, which is now there, orbiting every few hours with a spacecraft called magically Dawn, a spacecraft name which is not bereft of symbology of the kind that you're kind of used to me talking about. And then after we get through with all that, we're going to talk about the secret space program. You know, guys are kind of competitive, so if Dolan talked to you about this afternoon, the secret space program, I'm going to show you what's underneath that layer. The rabbit hole, as they say, goes very deep, Alice, very deep. So with that as prelude, let us begin. This remarkable photograph, which was taken from the space station just a few days ago, is the descending arc, the reentry of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, the last space shuttle of the last 30 years of NASA's Space Shuttle program, which was prescinding from the previous amazing human spaceflight program of the United States called the Apollo program, which went boldly where no one for a very, very, very long time had gone before, namely to and from the moon. And yes, Alice, we did go to and from the moon. In fact, I was there when the story that we didn't was being cooked up at NASA, at JPL, that July week, that amazing week in 1969. And of course, it was only in hindsight, decades later, that I kind of figured out what it was I was seeing. Because back then, we were so naive. We didn't have a clue as to what was really going on, and the layers and the depth of this rabbit hole and how far down it goes, and what things have been concealed for what reasons for how long. Hopefully now we are wiser. This mission, this last mission of Atlantis, as it landed, can we kind of bring these lights down? I saw the circuit breakers pop up, what do they call those things? They're automatic dimmers, they're on motors. We really need to kill them. Yeah, so, because you're going to want to see some of this stuff in very good contrast. It's not something I did, was it? No. Oh, good. Okay. One never knows. Anyway, when the shuttle landed, when Atlantis came back at dawn a few weeks ago, it landed on this runway trailing this bright, humid, turbulent vortex flow of Florida air behind it for the very last time. And no sooner had it landed and rolled to a stop than the headlines began loudly proclaiming the end of a voyage and the end of an era. And in fact, they also talked about the end of everything. The fact that with the end of the shuttle program, NASA's future was then and is now, in terms of mainstream perception, incredibly uncertain. Well, tonight I'm hoping to give you a window, a preview of what we have tried to figure out in terms of what's really going on. Because behind the scenes, we are being prepared, I believe, and I think I can substantiate it with real data, some phenomenal advances and discoveries and announcements that between now and the end of the year have the potential, finally. Is Steve Bassett here? Steve here? Okay. Stephen's ship is about to come in. We are going to have the D word, disclosure. It is on track. It is projectable. It is, as you will see by the end of the evening, if it doesn't happen, something so amazing will have taken its place that in fact it's just as if it does happen. And that will all become clear as the evening goes on. Now, the shuttle program has a very interesting history, which is in fact involved with this D word, disclosure. This is a view at Cape Canaveral decades ago, 3 decades ago, 30-some years, showing a comparison between the amazing workhorse of the Apollo program, the Saturn V, where if you ever saw one of these things lift off, your life would never be the same. It was the, and still remains, the mightiest rocket ever built, the mightiest movable engine humans have ever created in this modern era, and it was quietly moved aside when, for reasons that will become clearer as the evening progresses, the decision was made to come back from the moon and stay home. And instead of going boldly where no one had gone before, beyond the moon, to Mars, to the asteroids, to the outer planets, to inherit the solar system, as my friend Kraft Ericke wrote so splendidly in a book called The Magnificent Heritage, at a time when he could not get it published at NASA in the United States. This is the early 70s, as the shuttle program was just beginning and Apollo was now history. He literally had to go to the Soviet Union. Remember, this was at the height of the Cold War, to get a book about inheriting and using the resources for the benefit of all mankind that are out there. And of course, what he was writing about is nothing compared to the resources that we can show to you tonight that are really waiting for all of humankind. It was into that political milieu that this remarkable vehicle first made the scene. Because instead of doing what this did, this incredible vehicle, this Saturn V, the emblematic symbol of American prowess and power and technological mastery and the ability to overcome obstacles and come from behind and ultimately win the ultimate race to the moon, this place, we decided as a nation, as a culture, to come back from this astonishing tour de force, which I was so fortunate to have been able to participate in through the offices of this individual, an old friend, an old colleague, no longer with us now, Walter Cronkite, who at that time was called the most trusted man in America. I worked with Walter for, maybe half a decade, not continuously, but off and on during missions and preparations, and then as the shuttle wound, or the Apollo program wound down and the shuttle took over. And he was a phenomenal guy to work for because he taught me several things. He taught me what journalism really is, which is not about listening to a source. It's about comparing sources, independent information coming from different directions, weighing and balancing and judging on the veracity and the credibility of the people who are talking to you, while at the same time he would sit by the pool in Florida week after week after week during these mission run-ups as we were getting ready for the broadcast, and he would read huge, thick tomes that I and others would prepare for him, the so-called briefing books, so he could have literally taken the Apollo spacecraft apart and almost put it back together himself. In fact, he loved doing that. This is one of the TV shots where he was talking about how the Apollo command module separates from the service module and how they would turn around and use the force of the rockets to slow down going into lunar orbit, and all kinds of technology that a news guy was not supposed to be privy to. Well, he was the hardest working, most interesting journalist I could have possibly learned from. And one of the things I learned from him is there are layers to stories. The first story you get is not necessarily the right one. Little did I know how deep, as I said a moment ago, the rabbit hole vis-a-vis NASA is and extends. I should have probably had a clue, because when we weren't on the air and when we weren't, talking in terms of professional presentations and putting together copy and broadcasts and all that, a lot of the guys covering the space program kept talking about NASA, the acronym NASA, as short for never a straight answer. And at the time, I was 23. Why in the world are they saying this? This is NASA. Now I know. So we had this astonishing adventure, all of us. 3 million plus 300 million plus friends. About 1 billion people watched Apollo 11 land on the moon on that amazing night in 1969, July 20th. Again, a date, a moment in time that I did not understand the significance of until many, many decades later. July 20th was obviously not picked by accident, as we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then we had this phenomenal years between 69, 70, 71, with a hiatus because of the almost tragedy of Apollo 13, picking up through the end of the program, Apollo 17, again, a number which is significant that I didn't realize at the time. NASA was picking these numbers, these dates, these times, the names for the missions, the mission, all of this had an unseen backstory that not even Cronkite, I believe, would ever have believed. Because what we saw, what we covered, what we put out for the American people, and by metonymy the rest of the world, because remember, there were only 3 broadcast networks back then. CNN didn't exist, Fox didn't exist, there was ABC, CBS, and NBC, and in many of the years of coverage, we